I don't see him on Facebook.
Okay. We have Bob Lewis of Marsh Law Firm here to talk about the Maxwell trial. Bob, what are the key takeaways from week 1 of the trial?
Well, Maggie, I spent all week in the trial watching each day, and I think the big story of the week was the testimony of victim number 1, who used the pseudonym Jane. Jane testified that at the age of 14 in 1994, she met Mr. Epstein and Miss Maxwell being the defendant in this case, at an Interlochen, Michigan camp for arts and for children. It turns out that Mr. Epstein's a benefactor of that camp, and that soon after meeting him, he called her, or had his office call her in Palm Beach, where they both lived, and then had a driver go pick her up and bring her and her mom to meet him, and ingratiated himself to him. He proceeded to call her on multiple occasions, in this instances without inviting the mother, told her that he wanted to mentor her, that he had contacts in the entertainment industry that would be very useful to her. When she left on occasion, he would give her $100 bills, and eventually, with the help of Miss Maxwell, who was grooming her at the same time by speaking to her about sexual activities and asking her about boyfriends and going shopping with her, it all evolved into a sexual situation or relationship with Mr. Epstein. And this continued actually for almost 10 years, according to Jane, during which time Miss Maxwell was occasionally engaged in sexual activities as well. That was the primary focus of the week, if you would. She was cross-examined very aggressively by defense counsels. From time to time, she had to admit that she had told the FBI in interviews she'd given before her testimony things that were somewhat inconsistent with the testimony she gave. When asked about those inconsistencies, she, in some instances, she didn't recall. Some instances, she said there was no inconsistency because the FBI had misquoted or misstated what she had told them, and in other instances said she simply did not recall what she had told the FBI. I think that whole issue of her inconsistencies is going to continue to be a focus of the trial. My guess is that the defense lawyers will, in their case in chief, call some of the FBI agents that took those notes to ask them if they accurately recorded what Jane had told them. There were, in addition to Jane, there were a number of other, I think total of 9 additional witnesses, which in one way or another the government called to corroborate some of the parts of Jane's story. I thought the most important and interesting and perhaps helpful for the prosecution among these witnesses was a doctor of psychology, Rocicchio, and she testified, among other things, about something called grooming and what it means in the child sex abuse context, as well as delayed disclosure. What she said was there are several stages to grooming. It starts with targeting a vulnerable child, getting access to the child. Usually this involves going someplace where other children are around, so it's not viewed as unusual that you're there, and you're there for a particular purpose. In the case of Mr. Epstein and Maxwell, they had the cover of being benefactors at this camp. After that, you begin to ingratiate yourself to them. If you know a vulnerability, such as that they're from a family that's dysfunctional, you will befriend them and try to act as if you are one of the family members. You'll buy them gifts and so forth. And then after you've done that you go into the actual sex abuse, which is more or less the pattern that Jane has testified to. She also the doctor also testified to delayed disclosure. Jane admits that it took her almost 20 years before she finally disclosed this to authorities, although she also testified that she told her boyfriend about 10 years after the fact in the most vague terms about the abuse. And the doctor's testimony explained that this kind of delayed disclosure is common among sex abuse survivors because of the shame that goes along with it, because of the fact that they were children at the time it was happening and didn't understand, number one, what was going on. They were confused. In often instances, they were fearful if they did disclose, they would be punished or not believed. And so there are a lot of things that cause most sex abuse survivors to not disclose for even decades later. Those are some of the aspects of the trial I found most interesting, but once again, the most important thing at the trial this week was Jane's testimony and whether or not it should be believed.
And back to that example, can you tell us, just from what you heard, was there at least one instance where Jane corrected some of the FBI report and you did say, oh, that does make sense, that correction is valid here?
Yes, there was a testimony that she had, at some point the media got wind that she might be one of the victims of Epstein and started hounding her, calling her, following her, and she hired a lawyer to try and stop the abuse, the hounding that she was getting from the media. And she had told the FBI that she paid the lawyer $25,000. The FBI report said that she had paid him, the lawyer, $250,000. I think it's not credible and not believable that one had paid the lawyer $250,000 when the lawyer did nothing in terms of a lawsuit or anything of that magnitude. And so in that instance, it would appear that the FBI simply got it wrong. I'd also point out that I know that the FBI does not tape these conversations. They take notes and then write the notes up, and they do not routinely, and not in this case, do they show the reports to the interviewees so as to confirm its accuracy. So there are some reasons to believe that at least in some instances, these FBI reports are not accurate.
And what comes next in this trial? How long is it expected to last? We've heard ranges of 5 weeks. Can you tell us what you know about that?
Sure. I think from my being in court 1 week, the fact that we've only gotten through one victim, that the likelihood this will continue with witnesses for another 3-4 weeks. There's going to be only a couple of days in the last 2 weeks of December of trial because of the holidays. So my expectation is this goes well into January and the verdict will come sometime in the middle or late January.
And if Maxwell is found guilty in this case, there are so many consequences she can face. What kind of sentence or what range of sentences do you think she'll ultimately receive if found guilty?
According to the charges, for the most part, that she's been charged with, the statutory minimum is 5 years, and if you total up all of the charges and you add all of the possible sentences, it can total up to 70 or 80. As a practical matter, the judge will apply something called the sentencing guidelines, and by my estimation, she would probably be sentenced to something between 10 and 25 years, depending on how the trial plays out, how many of the charges she's convicted of, and what she says ultimately to the judge at sentencing regarding the charges that if she's convicted.
And is this really the last chance for survivors of either Epstein or Epstein and Maxwell together to seek justice and discover some of the facts that are missing from this story?
It's not their last chance. I think that over time there will be more victims come forward. Perhaps they will speak to the press or publish books, for instance. I also think that there could be some government records in due course. This may take years that will be declassified and explain some of the things that have been happening. As you know, there was very strange things that happened when they prosecuted Epstein back in Florida in the mid-2000s. He got a very sweetheart deal at that point, and there's been a lot of publicity and inquiries about why it is the government didn't charge him and do the prosecution they're doing now at that point. I think things about that investigation and that prosecution will come out in due course.
And what's your response to those who say or believe that the prosecution here is using Maxwell as a scapegoat following the death of Jeffrey Epstein?
Well, if you believe Jane and what I suspect the other victim witnesses are going to say, Maxwell was not a bit player in all of this. She was his girlfriend and his compatriot and his employee and his close friend for well over 2 decades, during which it's alleged that this sex trafficking activity was ongoing. And the testimony from these women, now women, then girls, and others, is that she was intimately involved in Epstein's life, and that she groomed these women by becoming their, quote, friend, taking them out, talking to them. There's going to be testimony, I think, that she showed some of these women how they were supposed to massage Jeffrey Epstein, and some women, I believe, will testify that she Maxwell, actually participated in some of the sexual activities. So I don't think she can be viewed as a scapegoat. If the witnesses are believed, she was very involved in the activities that are alleged.
And if Epstein had been prosecuted, do you think she would have been brought in previously?
It's hard to say, but I would think that they would eventually have charged her either separately or brought her into a superseding indictment against Epstein.
And why is it so important for victims to continue to fight for justice even decades after the abuse occurred?
Well, from my experience working with a lot of sex abuse survivors, even if they disclose and come to terms with the abuse decades later, which quite frankly and sadly is the case for most, it does bring about certain resolution or therapeutic benefit to them to do so. So I think there's great benefit to survivors generally when other survivors come forward and tell their stories, but also when they finally are capable of telling their story and being heard.
And what do you think about victims who've received any funds or restitution damages from the Epstein matter and this argument by defense counsel that they are motivated by money?
Well, it is true, and this is to be welcome, that many of the victims, including, I believe, all 4 of the victim witnesses in this case, did receive some compensation from the estate fund set up by the estate of Mr. Epstein. The defense is trying to argue that these women are testifying somehow in order to enhance the amount of money that they receive, which is just, it doesn't even make logical sense. All of the monies that they are to receive have already been awarded and paid to them, and there's nothing that a verdict one way or the other in this case is going to do to either increase or decrease the amount of money they received.
And do you have any comment from your client Sarah Ransom on this matter? Do you how she's holding up after 1 week of this and expecting many more.
Sarah is very glad that this day has come, that all victims through these 4 victim witnesses are going to but I have some inkling as to what it says, and I'm looking forward to doing so.
And where do you see this case going next? When we start next week, where do you think this will be going?
I think that the prosecution's case will continue for probably 2 more weeks. As I said, there's still 3 more victim witnesses, and I suspect there will be a number of other corroborating witnesses as well. So we've gotten 1 witness and 9 corroborating witnesses finished this week, and I expect that it'll take another 2 weeks to get everybody else through.
And what's your message to survivors who may be fearful to come forward out of fear of retaliation or public scrutiny, or similar to all of the clients in this case, just fear of the abusers themselves?
I understand their concern and their fears. What I would tell each of them is that in my experience working with survivors over the years, coming forward and working with professionals, therapists, lawyers, that they find that those fears are overblown, generally speaking, and that if they come forward and talk to therapists and talk to lawyers who know what they're doing, that they can help them through the process. And at the end of the day, they'll find that being given their voice in this matter is once again very therapeutic and helps them to recover from the trauma that the abuse has caused.
And Bob, throughout the past week of trial, you've actually been posting on Facebook some recaps of what happened and your memories of that experience. Will you be posting in the weeks to come as well?
I'm going to be in the trial most of next week, and then I'll likely be taking a break for Christmas and New Year's, and I might then be back for January.
And what's your response to those who question victim credibility in this case? In your experience working with victims and survivors of sex abuse, what's something you can say helps you understand them better?
I just think that you needed to be in the courtroom when Jane testified, and you would have heard a woman who was very traumatized by the whole thing. And I've had that experience with many other clients. So at least for me, given what I've seen and the work I've been doing, it was very clear that she was telling the truth. But I'm not the jury. It doesn't matter really what Bob Lewis thinks. This case will ultimately go to a jury of 12 people chosen from a pool of Manhattanites and Bronx and Westchester County people. And it's those 12 people, a very diverse jury of 6 African Americans, 6 Caucasians, 6 women, 6 men, who will ultimately have to determine the credibility of Jane and the other victims and come to a verdict based on all the law and based simply on the evidence presented to them at that trial.
And Bob, will you be available for more interviews in the future?
I will be. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That was Jennifer has more questions.